everyone, welcome to Gallery 76. This is the September 2020 exhibition, The Secret Garden, with Dr. Sharon and Belinda Jessup. And they've created a beautiful floral exhibition for us. I'm going to hand over to them now and they can take us through the exhibition. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Belinda Jessup. And about 18 months ago, Sharon invited me to participate in this exhibition with her. I'm a machine embroiderer and also a weaver. So I work on Mum's sewing machine and most of my work is free machining on water-soluble fabric.
And I'm Sharon. I'm a hand and machine embroiderer, and I had this great idea and invited Belinda Jessup with me to participate in an exhibition and to have it in an area where people are really appreciative of stitch, and this is why we chose the Embroiderers Guild here in Sydney. Okay. This would be one of the first works that I started with in this exhibition. I was in London and went to the Garden Museum, and they had a medal, and on the medal it said the Ancient Order of Free Gardeners, and I photographed it, and I thought, such a curious thing. And it wasn't until a while later that I really thought about making work about it. So I wanted to give it an Australian identity. So in our map, in our flag, we have a 7-pointed star. And so I used a 7-pointed star in my medal, but it was really difficult to embroider the words on it and get some form for it. And in the shutdown in COVID, I was doing a lot of gardening, and I realised using gloves is a way of hiding what you're doing. So within that secret garden, you could almost hide that secret by wearing gloves, and that's how the idea took off, using gloves in this exhibition. So in this image, used dandelions, which are just ordinary things in the garden, and that's what I was weeding when I thought of this idea. Also in our area in Australia, we have Bogong moths that come to visit us, and it's like protecting the garden, using gloves as protection, and that's also why, but it also alludes to pests in the garden as well. And this piece here is also this would be one of the last pieces that I made, and it's making 3-dimensional Bogong moths. And the final way of working in a 3D way, I took it off the wall and into a handmade glove, which was quite difficult to make, but I persisted. So I've used Australian native plants as well as introduced plants, and these are a tree that grows in my garden. It's a grevillea tree, silky oak it's called, and I was just taking the patterns of the leaves and the flowers, and like a Elizabethan glove, using that gauntlet, that protection, the metal of gauntlets used to protect knights' arms from battle, and so this is why I've used metal machine embroidery for this work. Okay. While I was making designs, I wanted to make a design with tulips, and we have a flower festival in our city in Canberra, and I had made a very colourful image of red, yellow, bright green tulips, and it sat on my wall for 8 months until I decided I would use metal threads and tone it right down and make it a very different image than what I had set out to do. These are Australian plants, leucadendrums, and they grow in our area, and again I have changed from colour to metal thread, and so these lovely flowers coming up and the leaves in silver. Beautiful. Many people will be familiar with these very pesky white cabbage moths that eat any brassicas that you have in your garden, any broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower. and they float around. And so it's just taking things from the ordinary and using again that shape of the gauntlet to protect, to battle against the pests in the garden. This one again is using dandelions and that notion of battling with dandelions. They're constant in my garden. But I do enjoy the flowers, and I've just learnt that you can actually make rope from the stalks of the dandelions, but I have yet to do that. Again, using the cabbage moths, this time taking it to a lace, really reducing the textile just to the fine threads of the little cabbage moths, and using a white gold silk organza, metal organza, to, you know, point to that notion of battling against these pests. These are using the Bogong moths again, exploring how they enter into our gardens, and they probably work with us in the garden, but just using my skills to make it very lacy between each of the moths. Again, another plant from my garden, bottle brush. They're usually reds, they can be pinks, and I've translated into gold, and the leaves are silver, and working away and making it very elegant, because I find these plants very elegant when they're kept in a garden where there's plenty of water and care. Again, using this medal, the Order of Free Gardeners. This was one of the early pieces, and playing around, this would have been one of the first metal thread lace pieces of the series. I've made lace before with metal threads, but this was a little bit more basic, you might say, when you look at the other work, but still trying to make this medal that is quite difficult. And I used the grevillea again in this piece, using metal thread and showing the work in the garden with the black fingers, and how we work in the garden. It's hard labour. So these pair of works here, we have pairs of gloves in these frames, and these are using Banksias that are in the garden, and quite common throughout Australia. They're very beautiful, and I really try to get the spaces between here. Normally when I'm using metal thread or making lace embroidery, I pin it down, everything so meticulously, but I was teaching a class and a student said, "Oh no, I just let it go." And after embroidering that all, when I washed it, I held my breath and just let the metal threads do what they do, and they do distort and twist, but luckily they worked out quite well for this one. And this final piece here is a grevillea again, and introducing a little wattlebird. Wattlebirds love the grevilleas and feed off them, and so that talks about it's not only the plants in the garden, but the animals that come in as well.
So this is a large piece taken from a photograph, and for me the secret garden is twofold. Living in Australia, I'm very much from the outback. I grew up in the outback of Australia, but I really love English gardens, and the secret garden was a thing that I really enjoyed because it was some way I could play with both areas of the garden. And I do have a lovely garden in Canberra as well. But this large image of a mulga tree, which is a tree that grows, an acacia tree that grows out west in Australia, and this had a rising moon. The moon is just coming up through just at that right time of day, and a friend actually took the photograph, and I spent over a year embroidering it, and it has 26,600 squares to it. But also the gridded pattern is something that I relate to as part of the Western landscape, which to me is a big garden. So that was a labour of love for me. And on the other side here is actually a waratah, and it is done in the same method, which is all machine embroidered individually, but it only has about 13,000 squares, so it didn't take quite as long. But again, it is just that gridded pixelation of the landscape again, which is another word for garden in a way. And on the other wall over here, we have, which is part of my English garden, which starts off as thoughts of the garden, and the secret garden really is in lots of ways a renewal, especially in the book that was written in the late 1800s, early 1900s, I can't remember the exact date, but it was all about renewal and rebirth. So to me here, and I'm also known as the rose person, so all these little individual components make up the garden wall, and start off with a very dead garden, starting here where everything's sort of, all in that decaying stage, and then moves through to the start of spring and the renewal of the garden, and it's just a hanging garden wall.
So this work along the corridor here came out of a residency I did in Canberra, and I thought I was going to make very delicate work about gardens there. But when I got there, I realised the people there had grown their gardens using very hardy plants, and the gardens were solid, they weren't lacy and fragile. So I walked around the area looking at what was growing and the birds that are in the gardens, and this started off my journey into using native plants. And under many of them you'll see there's road maps. It's a very new area, a very car-dependent area, and so the roads play a really prominent part in those suburbs. And along the way we had a big hailstorm, and so I included that, the hail, and used it as a decorative device, basically to bring the whole work together. This also talks about the road map underneath and the gardens, and this is being in the secret garden, standing there looking at what's going on. And so in the detail of the background up the top, there are still roads, and then the really obvious road map down the bottom. This was probably more a sample when I started it, playing around. I made lots of samples and thinking about this idea and including the most beautiful bird that sings, our Australian magpie. This one again uses not road maps so much, but the metal industrial design of drains that are in streets. So it talks about water drains, but then I've layered gardens on top of that. So it's just using it as a design device. Again, I'm using the road pattern underneath and trying to give that hot summer feeling using the bright colours, and all the different gardens. Many gardens had introduced plants, so I included that as well. And these two also just focusing on the plants, and the two figures in it were actually hand embroidered, and then I appliqued them onto the machine embroidery. And I was thinking about how in Elizabethan embroidery they use slips, they're little embroidered areas that are then stitched onto large pieces. So that's how these little figures of, it's actually me weeding in the garden,
why I use that in that way.